Just a small amount of background. This is, for me, this is quite new. I must say I don't know a lot about laws of form. My background is in physics and also in machine learning. But out of some problems that I have or struggle to understand, like where things are heading to, I've looked at, I discovered some of these things. I first discovered some of what Mascherano did in Valera, and bit by bit come through as a sort of a day job. I have two hats. One is I build machine learning businesses, and the other is I sit in a university where I look at kind of on ecology, and systems thinking applied to a new university. I just was wondering if everyone can quickly give an introduction to themselves before I cover a few things around what's happening in machine learning, and then launch into a few very general sort of questions to get. I want this to be fairly, well, what I say, not hot as in angry, but hot as in
sexy.
Exactly. Thinking like when this sector started, like with cybernetics, like you think about the energy that was in the system then. This like maths was being thrown out the door, or people were starting to think how society could be organized in a different way. Obviously, as all disciplines evolve, they cool down into a more crystallized sort of state. But I'm interested in also just kind of bubbling up a bit of speculation in relation to where things are going, sort of thing. So I'll just, I'm Luke Robinson, by the way.
Hi, I'm João Leão, and I'm mostly a physicist. That's basically what I've learned to do, but I've done many other different things in between. Namely, as last worked for the past 20 years at Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory, mostly helping engineers build instrumentation for and telescopes for all kinds of astrophysical observations, namely solar physics and now general optical and microwave observations. And I retired in January, and I ran into laws of form maybe 46 years ago. Which is kind of an interesting thing. I'm never really, I know a lot of people interested in cybernetics, and I was a member of several groups interested in it, but I can't really claim that I ever worked in the subject. So that's about it.
So I'm Jan Ritter. I do a PhD in law. The subject is network organization law, so kind of a normative perspective on what Lauren has presented us with. And I find the laws of form very useful because it can give a meta language, as I find it, to combine different disciplines, different epistemologies maybe also, and that helps me to enrich the research and to generate new perspectives onto my subject, which I feel is needed. On the other side, I'm quite new to the studies of the laws of form. Well, not to say B anymore, but so
thank you. I'm Vanilla Beer. I'm daughter of Stafford Beer. I'm a painter, which has been my full-time work forever, but I also have a degree in theology and an MA in Western esotericism, all of which covers several bases, I think.
I'm Luke Kaufman. I'm a mathematician. When I was a kid, I used to do science projects, and through them I learned a lot about switching circuits, and read Claude Shannon's original paper about switching circuits in Boolean algebra, and played with some of that. Then I studied topology and other things, and ended up with a PhD in topology. And a couple of years after my PhD, I ran into laws of form and read it, not knowing anybody else who had seen it, and it did away with any worries I ever had about the foundations of mathematics, because after I read laws of form, I knew there weren't any. And then I met some people who were having a seminar at my university, University of Illinois in Chicago, every Wednesday, and they would get together and have dinner and have a good time and read laws of form, sometimes out loud, sometimes together, working through it and playing with it. And this seminar went on for a couple of years. Somewhere in the middle of it, we let Heinz von Forster know. We knew about him in the Whole Earth Catalog, so we let Heinz von Forster know that we were studying this, and phoned him up. And well, I heard an anecdote earlier yesterday that he laughed and laughed all night when he encountered laws of form, and that's what he did when he got on the phone with us as well. And I'll never forget that particular experience. Anyway, I've been playing about with laws of form in relation to the other things that I do ever since, and I'll pass this mic over here and show you that how it has affected my studies in topology and knot theory. I discovered that by using laws of form, I can not only study these knots, but I can make them disappear.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh my god. I was right here and I saw it from the back and I still don't know how you did it.
It just disappeared.
It just
That's why you studied topology
It's
for many
exactly
years.
the same
You
as
know?
this. Here is this form, and now it's gone.
I mean, that in combination with Randy's talk is just blowing my mind right now. So yeah, I can't wait for dinner soon. But hi, my name is Divyaman Sahu. I usually go by Sahu, but my first name actually Divyaman is Sanskrit. It means full of light, which I wanted to share. But yeah, some people here can actually pronounce it, which is great. Divyaman. I don't know, do you want to try it? Divyaman.
Divyaman.
Thanks, cool. Thank you. No. So I first of all, I'm very, very humbled to be here and be invited to share my work here. And I might be one of the babiest people here, honestly, because I'm not very old. But I have a background in math, music, and philosophy. Don't triple major or you don't end up sleeping at all. But I was looking for a topic to write my undergraduate thesis on my junior year in the summer, and I was in the library perusing books for many hours, and I chanced upon this little book. There's a 1973 version of the Laws of Form, and it was just like the rabbit hole, you know, and I kept going down and down and down and down and down, and I haven't looked back since. And I've mostly been isolated, as maybe in many conversations with many people, like my explorations have been very like isolated. I think I reached out to Umberto, Maturana, but he didn't respond. But this was like I think a year or something after I had the Laws of Form, and then I kept working on it. I was interested in incompleteness, and then of course I read many papers of people who are in this room here, which is just amazing. And then I moved to Chicago and I sent Lou an email. I'm at the Art Institute at the moment doing art things, and yeah, I'm here. I'm really happy to be here and share work. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Yannis Bardakos. I'm from Greece. I studied mathematics. I define myself as an artist, but that doesn't mean anything. It's just a definition. I also teach in Shanghai, in Roy Ascot, the Creative Art Studio, which is actually a department that combines art and cybernetics. We do teach cybernetics for 4 years in this context. And I jumped into the idea of self-reference because I really enjoyed the complexity and the paradoxes of self-reference. So suddenly I realized that I had a PDF of the Laws of Form somewhere in my hard drive. I don't know when I downloaded that. It was probably using a torrent site, downloading many books. I don't know really how it happened to be there. So I really found more versions of the book and I started working on it. And I'm trying to work on it in China and create some kind of ontology for art creation. I'm doing new media art and traditional art, And so the idea of laws of form as a guideline for generating aesthetics is one of my challenges. Sir, re-entry.
One of the first questions that we got from the audience before I walk into it is why is his work not as appreciated? Like beyond the fact of his personality, sort of thing. No, why is his work not as appreciated, or where do you think the sticking point is? And also, if you don't want to exactly answer that, a little bit is what should be more known about his work, or what is the kernel that really more people should know, and maybe who.
What I'm going to say is strictly my opinion, and I have no basis to, other people. I mean, I'd love to hear what Lou has to say about this, because he knows a lot more about this whole story than I do, and he knew Spencer Brown, etc. To me, the book was really, when I got it, when a friend of mine who was a sometime student of Gardner passed me the book, thinking that it would help me with studying something that I was studying at the time, which is basically what I still talked about today. And I couldn't really make ends of it when I first read it. And one time I might have, smoked something. I don't know. It might have happened. And I actually opened the book and read the first 4 chapters, and it sort of made sense to me. But again, like everything else, when you take in that state, it becomes a little clear, and then the clarity goes away. But with laws of form, it stayed to some extent. I still can't tell you. I mean, I'm sorry to say this to Graham, but who thinks this is the greatest thing ever written. I'm not sure it is a very great book. I'm not sure. I think it is cute. It's intriguing. It's interesting. I think, of course, George Spencer Brown is a strange, interesting, somehow tragic figure, and that also adds to the history of the book. John Williams' talk gave me another look into it, and I asked him in the end, do you think that the Israeli reception and the treatment of Spencer Brown by these strange hippies had something to do, and the fact that they were the marketing side of the laws of form, one way or another, contributed to the fact that the book never made it to other academic circles, namely logicians, mathematicians, etc. And he told me, oh, no, this is entirely deserved, the reception. And he's probably right. He's probably right about that. So in the end, what I can say is I'm still holding my last opinion about the book. And for some reason, I'm holding to it for 40 years. I haven't given it back to my friend. Mm-hmm. So there must be some merit to it, really. And it has intrigued me. And I don't work on this stuff all the time. In fact, I work in spurts. But I'm still intrigued. I still want to know where it sends you, where it gives you. I don't think there is a great revelation in it. But what there is, and which stayed with me, is the imprecation, the do this, do that, take a. He's right about that. That a great part of mathematics is orders, is do this, do that. And in some sense, the book is an order to, take on this and carry it down the road. That's, I think, the best I can say about it.
Can I make a comment there?
Mm-hmm.
Do you regard Euclid's Elements as a great book?
Yeah, Euclid's Elements.
Okay, well, I think that Spencer Brown has done for formal space what Euclid did for metric space.
I wish I could agree with you.
Okay.
Maybe one day I will.
Yeah. So maybe the experience of somebody using the laws of form in social science is something a little different. The main idea would be that you're forced to draw a distinction, and then you can only grasp and you can only work with the inner side of that distinction. And that implies that you always carry with you something that you have to imply, but that you cannot control. And I think that's my personal experience also with the book, that opens a flank that makes you vulnerable a little bit, and So it implies a little humbling experience, actually. And I'm not sure that everybody is willing to take that risk, that speculation, that despite always carrying some degree of uncertainty, this might still amount to something.
I am no mathematician, but it seems to me that we're regarding this book as a failure quite wrongly. 50 years later, here we all are talking about
Absolutely.
I agree with you. Let me see. I could tell you, if you wanted to understand how other mathematicians and logicians reacted to it, I could kind of give you an accounting of a couple of cases, and then you begin to see something. But before I do that, notice that the book doesn't proceed like any mathematics book of the modern kind that you have encountered. And Christina was talking about that in a kind of a deep way in her talk. But if you open an ordinary mathematics book, it proceeds by conventions that have been honed for a long time to tell you that we will use these terms, no definition for them. There are certain relationships among these terms and certain axioms about them. There might be a paragraph discussing what the meanings are of the terms, but that is separated from the terms. So there are points. We don't know what they are. 2 points determine a line, and so on. That's the way it goes in a modern mathematics book. And so, not at all like Euclid. Euclid said a point is that which has no part in it. I assume he meant it as a philosophical statement that was mathematical at that time, and the other axioms. But we don't do it that way anymore. We do it by undefined terms, and that's the convention. So if someone writes in the Euclidean fashion, as a philosopher who doesn't distinguish himself from being a philosopher or a mathematician, then it tends to go past people. They don't know what they're reading. So, for example, the logician Abraham Robinson wrote a review of it, and he was favorable to it. He thought it was interesting, as you might say, as a new way to look at Boolean algebra. But the key thing, I could find his review on my computer if you want to see it. He didn't mention the word distinction in his review. He said this man produces a certain operator with these rules, and it goes this way, and I think it has some interest. He didn't mention the word distinction. I assume he didn't mention the word distinction because it went right past him. He didn't understand that part, but he saw that the formalism had some interest. And so I think that it's kind of that makes the book a little bit invisible at this time to many people. But the ideas that are inherent in the book are nevertheless there, and they will come through eventually. So things will change, I would think. Another example of a reaction is Martin Gardner, but of course Martin Gardner is a journalist who did fantastic work in writing about mathematics, but he was a philosopher also. And when inquired, and I wrote him a letter once about it, and I said, you could write a column about this, and he wrote back and he said, well, there are many people who have made notations for Boolean algebra. I don't know that this would be better than any other notation, and these ideas go back to Leibniz. The idea of making one distinction and building everything up from there, the Leibniz and the binary system and so on. And so in his judgment, without anyone to prompt him and say it was better than that, it didn't look like anything other than yet another. And then he went on to say, and I myself have made up some and referred to some modes of writing Boolean algebra that he had made. So I think that gives you maybe some kind of picture of why the book didn't make the impact that it could have or will have. I think I agree with Graham fundamentally that it is to form what Euclid is to geometry, but maybe like some things, it comes before the background was there. When Euclid wrote geometry, people had been doing geometry for a long time, and he took it all and put it into one system. And people have not been doing mathematics of form for a long time before Spencer Brown comes along and starts doing it. Maybe Charles Sanders Peirce was doing mathematics of form. Not so many people. Anyway, I think I should stop.
Now I'll make another comment. I think one reason perhaps why he's not better known is that Wittgenstein died before the publication of Laws of Form. In the Tractatus, Wittgenstein remarks that the interdefinition of not A or B is equivalent to A implies B, indicates that the symbols used are not the primitive sign of logic, while the cross is the primitive sign of logic. And I think that Wittgenstein, had he been alive, would have been extremely excited by the discovery.
Yeah, there is a place.
It's proposition 5.461.
There's a place in the Tractatus where Wittgenstein says, "Where in the world is the negation sign? It is nowhere in the world. It is part of the great mirror."
Yes, that's right.
And there you have the essence of his picture theory. But Laws of Form explains to Wittgenstein in a Spencer Brown way why the picture theory is not necessary, because the map and the territory are interrelated.
Yeah, reading Wittgenstein after having thoroughly digested Laws of Form is quite an enlightening experience, all right.
Well, I'm just going to be very quick about it because I know we have questions. Just to share, when I finally found the Laws of Form, the book, and I wanted to write about it, and I went to the math department in my school, and I told them, hey, this is my idea, and their response, and I quote, was literally, "This is not math. You can't do this. You can't write your thesis on this." And that wasn't the first time, that I got this sort of weird feeling from the mathematical community about maybe a feeling threatened, or feeling like this is not something that is real math, because the tone of the book, and I'm wondering whether it has something to do with it being called a work of mathematics or a work of philosophy, or the language surrounding the work itself, and whether that has something to do with and also who's asking this question, right? What audience are you talking? Why is it not well received or well read? But where, in what capacity are we talking about? In school? Are you talking about in the philosophy community, or are you talking about the mathematical community?
Well, I put the question, so maybe I can just answer that. So my question was, so it was really around when it was initially published, there was a lot of excitement about it, and in some ways that excitement hasn't moved out into the general community. In a way, you could say there's probably less people now interested in it now than there was back then. And so my question was, there's been 50 years, and why hasn't it taken off? And so I'm thinking generally taken off in various sciences. And I was, during this conference, I've put this to quite a few people here, and even yourself. There's one answer that I had, and there's another answer that came from a few people. One of those was that we need a layman's introduction. Someone was saying that there is actually quite a good layman's introduction in German, I believe.
Remarkable Mark. Yeah, the tree.
The tree. Okay.
Right.
Right, I haven't noticed.
Do it.
Okay, all right. But the other, just coming in from the outside, I suppose 50 years, Leibniz, he wasn't the first one to find the binary system, and I believe he actually came very close to this, except he got tripped up by marking the unmarked space. He used the 0 and 1, whereas when he actually spoke about it, he spoke about the nothing and God created. It was the image of creation. God created in negation of himself in the nothing, but then he got tripped up by using 1 and 0. But anyway, so he did invent the binary system as important and fundamental, he thought, to arithmetic. And then it wasn't applied, basically, until living memory, really. It wasn't applied until living memory. So maybe that's what's happening here, I don't know. But I think the reason, my view is the reason it hasn't succeeded in that sense, and people might disagree with me that it hasn't succeeded, is because we haven't found an application powerful in any of the sciences, like, say, bits in computers.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, now, that speaks to a kind of curiosity of mine, frustration of mine. The chapter 11, of course, you wrote it much too cryptically. I mean, if you want to criticize something about that book, I mean, you have to be a detective to figure out what happened
the hell
in
is
chapter
that?
11. And it's very beautiful, and it's complex when you finally understand what's going on with the modulators. And it actually is the basis. He is expressing what is the basis of computer circuitry, asynchronous computer circuitry. And some of those circuits are actually in all the computers that you use. And it's a formalism that you won't find anywhere else, a very nice, clear formalism for understanding how those things work. You normally open an engineering book and there's transistors and other things added to those circuits, and it isn't made into just pure mathematics, but there is pure mathematics there about re-entry and time. But shouldn't there be more? You think about that end of it, and it looks like, to anyone's intuition who plays with it, there should be more. It isn't just telling you how to form computer circuits that are already being used. I don't believe it is. I think it's telling you more, but I don't know what it's telling me more, right? Someone in this room will see that it is telling us more. Maybe you, me, somebody. Sooner or later, I'm sure of it. That's one of the places where there might be the beginnings of some extraordinary application. On the other hand, Shannon made the breakthrough to see that switching circuits and Boolean algebra were isomorphic. And at the time, I don't think it was applied, but a few years later, by the 1950s anyway, it was being used by engineers. And it was a very clear, simple thing. So maybe there's a clear, simple thing that is a beautiful application coming out of there as well. I don't know.
Can I say something to this?
Sure.
I agree completely with what Lou said, and even and I have to, my attachment to it is also based on this notion that there is clearly more to it. There's more to be taken out of it that has been taken out, and I've in periods of my life I've been the whole the bell rang and says, well, this could be another aspect where it shows up. I for instance, actually, I talked to Graham about this. For a period, I was quite infatuated with John Wheeler's writings, which are really delightful, and in some sense they are metaphorical, and they're aphorisms. They're these long aphorisms, and which sound incredibly fetching and interesting. And he suffered through those too, and these were ideas that he applied basically to the same problem of unifying gravity and quantum mechanics. And some of his ideas evoked in me the notion that you should look for the forms inside, not in nature, not outside, not in things that we construct, but in conceptual constructions, right? In the persistence of some forms of reasoning, right? And he had for some while he had two groups of his students working on two versions of the two primitives of the primary arithmetic that I talked about. One of them is the Poincaré's lemma the boundary of a boundary being zero, right? Which he believed could be basically the form of all conservation laws, that he could bound them. And some of his students produced some very interesting models that came close to it. And on the other side, he had Teitelbaum and Mark Hainaut working on this problem of embeddability, which allows you to put one geometry in one dimension inside a higher dimension geometry, how you can project one out. And in those days, those things were done with Hamiltonian dynamics, complex use of the old quantum gravity. But today these things are coming back, and other guys, like especially since the observation of gravitational waves, and people are looking to the embeddability of spaces, etc., and to the things that were developed in geometry in the 20s, basically by Ludwig Eisenhardt and other people. So I still see these as two shapes of theories that remind me of the laws of form. Maybe that's where we should look for them. I have to say that I came here out of curiosity also because, I had a little thing to say. But I'm very impressed with all the work they presented in any of all these directions. I mean, Dirk has done a remarkable work in expressing going beyond Luhmann and his which work is sort of tentative and initiative. A lot of people have done work over these years, and if for nothing else, the laws of form, maybe it's not a work of mathematics. It's really a work of metaphysics or a way of a new discipline in some sense. But Lou is perfectly right about the fact that the book is not written like a math book. And in fact, you read through it and sometimes it looks like a poetry book. And some other times there are things that are incredibly cryptic, and there are other things that are incredibly clear-cut and beautiful. So that mishmash is what keeps the machine running, I think, ultimately.
Can I throw a question?
Yeah.
There'll be so one thing I'm very interested in, like, as kind of a physicist and doing applied sort of things, like there's one side where you might use something for a circuit to do circuit design, but then at the other end you've got all these feedback and recurrent, and it affects people personally and intuitive, like in their heart or intuitively. I'm interested in like how this might have related to its reception or the tension between kind of the different modes of thinking, and so I'm interested in like, has it affected you on an intellectual and also kind of a psychological way? And just if you can just give one kind of sentence, yes it has or no it hasn't, like rather, yeah, just so we can get through.
My answer is I don't know. That's all I can say.
Well, I think, although I don't have that much experience, I sometimes find it a little frightening how much reveals about yourself when you write a text. So I don't think that you can really distinguish a personal and an intellectual experience with it, but
It might.
Well, I loved it from first sight. I thought it was enchanting.
And you bared with the author, that is more amazing.
The book itself has a combination of superb English and when you are looking at it from a mathematician's eyes and actually look through that, the mathematics is perfect sound. So it's a remarkable experience to encounter a book like that.
Yeah.
Just singular.
What about applied psychology in any sense? Has it affected how like you think about yourself at all, or
Of course.
Yeah.
In perhaps the same way that the Douglas Harding experience would affect how a person thinks about themselves or the absence of themselves.
I actually, I'm going to just share really quickly my most recent experience of having that feeling was, so I'm in this residency in Maine where it's just taught by a 100-year-old woman. She's a dancer, and every week we have new teachers come in. So this one week we worked on actually Shiv, if you know the god Shiv. He's also known as Nataraj, who's like the lord of dance or the king of dance. And we did this form that if you've seen the Nataraj, he sort of has this pose with one foot coming out, and there's a circle of fire around. And so there's this one practice where we sort of try to bring our ego down to our foot in a way, in a certain circular way, where you, using the breath while walking, you try to push and embody something that comes in and then try and push it out. And so I've been feeling Spencer Brown or just boundary work feature in a lot of what we call somatic work, with the body-mind centering and, like, you know, kind of body-based embodied practices that have actually, it's funny that when people talk about it, I'm like, you need to read this book, but because it just seems like they're on the same page with that. So yeah.
Well, I found the book extremely clear, crystal clear, but that made me personally feel much more unclear. No, I mean, everything was so confusing after that, because I started realizing or thinking about potential connections, and then I fell into that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Leon, I've forgotten your question. You had a question.
I've forgotten it as well. I have questions around embodiment, because the way I approach laws of form, and thank you, Salom, for saying you experience it in the body as well. I get very isolated within the academic community when I feel that my body-based approach is out of sync with the head-based approach. When I go into the storytelling community, I'm told I'm too heady for them, so I'm always marginal. I don't feel marginal here. It's so but there is this link between, that laws of form does, between reason and emotion, body and physical and metaphysical, if you like. And there is this link to universal values that I think is important. It's a priori. It is the thing that has been unarticulated but present under many of the presentations, particularly this afternoon. Jan Hendrik yours on justice, the systems, your values. You had something in your recursive thing, Florian. Yes, values. Yeah. That indicates that there is something metaphysical and ethical, if you like, Vanilla, that is intrinsic to the way laws of form operate, that I would like to have more discussion about, more acknowledgement of. Can that happen? It's so happen.
Maybe I can add something. If in psychological terms, I can't really say that it affected me in some sense, but physics is a very old science, and it has always, and like mathematics, there's never been so much the desire to unify the whole of physics in epistemological terms. In some respects, but there's been a great push to try to find the ultimate fundamental laws of nature, and particle physicists believe that they're doing that, and on the other hand, the cosmologists have sort of a very fundamentalist, very unified view. But the science itself, the several aspects of it, were never really brought together. And I think, if I can remember from my little first trip of understanding of laws of form, I had this illusion that maybe you ever read Borges, how do I call it? The Aleph, the story. Yeah, it was the guy that has this one point that contains all points in the world, and it's in Buenos Aires under some staircase. I didn't really have that sense, but I have the sense that this, then somehow this is so abstract and so informal in so many respects that maybe at some point I could coalesce, let's say, two aspects of physics into one, thanks to this way of thinking, right? And I actually see you guys doing in the social sciences doing something almost similar, right? Sort of thinking of it as some sort of the chora, right? As the Platonic chora, this one big pot where the what's it called, not the dramaturg, the demiurge had the mold to fill the rest of the universe. So I had that vision, but you know, it was just a mirage most likely. So anybody else?
Yeah. How much time do we have?
18 minutes.
18 minutes. Okay, I just am very interested, for my own sake, just to go through a couple things on machine learning and what is happening here. Kind of like, I'm interested in how Cybernetics started and the sort of ways that people thought out of that. And to some extent, like I see Spencer Brown's work as part of this, but then it's evolved into what you might say is kind of machine learning systems. And obviously machine learning systems at the moment are making a big effect on the world. And I'm interested in wondering if there's things that we might be able to pick up or models that might help us wrestle with what might be happening in these systems that are often black box systems. If you can have a quick look at the screen behind me, this was generated by OpenAI's chatbot. All it started with what is laws of form, and it continued and generated this text. You can go to if you type in talk to transformer, you can type any text and it will try to continue what it says. So this is
How much background talk do you have with it before it generates?
Nothing. This has been trained on things like Wikipedia, a whole bunch of corpus of text. I'm sure they've spent a lot of money on it.
But it has much prior experience of conversation?
It's got lots of experience of conversation. They've trained on huge bodies of text, and it's probably a lot of money to train these things.
So you fed it the laws of form?
I fed it nothing
no?
other than what is laws of form.
Oh, all right.
And you can go to the website and you can do that yourself, and you'll see what it generates. So it generated.
It's on the net?
Yeah, exactly. So type in talk to transformer and you'll find it. So this is what it generated when I said what is laws of form, and I didn't put a question mark. Okay. This is what it generated when I put the question mark.
Wow. Will it be the same if we try it again?
I haven't checked it.
Wow.
And by the way, this model
This is astonishing.
there's a better model now that takes more GPUs to run.
Let's just read it.
Amazing.
The laws of form come about through some cognitive process.
incredible.
It's very suspicious.
This is suspicious at first.
It's
so right.
Numbers that a number has.
Yes.
That's what right here.
Yeah.
So that sounds very scientific.
I'm not sure if there's any sense in the bottom down here, but to me this is a shock. No,
What would really be a shock is if you put that question in and out came the first page of laws.
That would be Google, right?
All right, so I'm just going to quickly flick through a couple things that has happened in machine learning AI at the moment, just to spur a conversation, hopefully. So roughly, the more interesting sort of systems are these recurrent machine learning systems where you have an input, you've got a bunch of hidden states, and you have feedback in these systems. Now, so these are like circuit diagrams, and you have different outputs, and the way you might constrain it, or the way you might put a human in the loop, you get different sorts of effects. This is this is a bit of an example of how you this is a particular thing called an autoencoder, and it learns a representation of a 2 from a whole lot of different handwritten digits and numbers. So this is often the gold standard with a lot of different tests. In machine learning, you build your algorithms and you see how accurate it is at identifying handwritten digits. So this is where it started. You can run this on a laptop computer at the moment, but you can think about a lot of what these more simple things are doing, actually learning boundaries between two different types of cats and dogs. and the way that you deal with the boundary, the way you deal with points or examples near the boundary becomes to me, obviously talking about boundaries and separation and distinctions. This was kind of an interesting entry point, and got me thinking. You can start to do more complex things now, where you look at a scene and you'll label the different, and these systems will learn to label the different objects in a scene. But as you can see, it's not just labeling objects; it's also labeling what's going on between the different objects.
I have a question for you about that slide. I'm always having to pass these CAPTCHA tests.
Yeah.
Well, these machines could probably pass those CAPTCHAs.
They can now. So there's a whole area of trying to build better tests that will tell if you're a human or not. There's a little bit of like a dreaming sort of scene. It's a little bit scary, but you start to see this is what is hidden inside the network before it's properly separated things, or it's got clear distinctions between things, you might say. This art was sold last year, or I think it was earlier this year, for £450,000. It was totally generated by a generative model.
And the purchaser knew that?
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yes. Yeah. These faces, photos here, have all been generated. Totally, none of these people exist.
Wow.
But what is very interesting is you can condition the model to say, well, I want people with brown hair, or I want people with blue eyes, or I want people with dark skin. And those distinctions between kind of eye color, skin color, these are extremely complex.
Yeah.
When you have to generate a random sample of faces, it's doing something pretty sophisticated.
Yeah.
This here in autonomous vehicles, one of the businesses that I work with is doing sensor fusion in terms of autonomous vehicles. We're bringing the images from multiple different cameras into one unified representation. This is a generated scene. It's totally fake. This is much more recent. This is applying the same sort of techniques to try and generate videos. So I couldn't get this to move, but this is an attempt to try and generate footballers, ice skaters, and surfers. And these are actually moving videos. They look a little bit awkward, but as you saw with the faces, the original faces also looked very awkward 2 or 3 years ago. But in 2 or 3 years' time, we are going to see something pretty interesting. This is people turning sketches into photos. So you can, if you're not a good drawer, this system will try and guess what the photos might be from this. Obviously a big application is autonomous vehicles, where you're having to make very complex decisions from a whole range of sensors, which are kind of like your cameras, your LiDARs, your things like this. They're doing a whole lot of different, the route planning, how you make decisions, the decision trees are kind of quite sophisticated. As you know, Google recently built a system that won on Go. I used to think that when machine learning beat the best player in Go, then actually it really made me question about where the world is going to head to, or what we have to worry about. You know? That turns out to be much easier than this game called StarCraft on the right, and this is because the state space explodes. The numbers of degrees of freedom, that become a much harder problem, and now it's just defeated one of the professional players, not the world best player in StarCraft. But these are using kind of like tens of thousands of GPU hours to train these things. But
a comment before I forget it again. But my feeling about those game learning programs is that they have the potential. Those game learning machine learning programs have the potential to teach us something deeper about how to handle heuristics, because we can learn from the programs now and try to develop deeper heuristics. Of course, mathematicians are always trying to develop deeper heuristics about the material that they're confronting, which is always way beyond them. So it's similar, but this is a very beautiful gaming challenge.
Yeah. Alf, I'm sure you know, but AlphaGo taught itself to play chess in a morning, and it's now the strongest player in the world. The world's ever seen. It's astonishingly strong. It's just absolutely mind-blowing concept, I think.
This is something a little bit closer to home. It's recently in particle physics. Machine learning models have been able to really get through a lot of the noise of the system and distinguish events better than handcrafted human design models to be able to understand the system. We see the same happening in biology, where you feed it a lot of data, it starts to be able to discover new types of drugs. It's sitting also obviously in predictive health, predictive medicine. You see obviously a lot of companies investing in wearables. In agriculture, it's people building robotic systems that can go and look after the vegetables in an organic way. One of the businesses that I work on actually works on this. This is not our robot, but a lot of we have to distinguish in what we're doing. We have to distinguish between broccoli and weeds and different types, the sizes of the heads of the broccoli.
And the weeds, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
This year's getting a bit more towards the future, which I'm a bit worried about, which is looking at what's going on with surveillance systems, which really you might say, well, this is what we started at, this is what the dream was, that we'd have governance systems, cybernetics systems, like what we looked at in Chile, and now you might say this is realized in China. But is this what we want? How do we think around how to manage these systems? So this is a little bit more sophisticated version of what you just saw, where you're tracking people, predicting their trajectories, predicting where their gaze is heading. And we all know about the elections, fake news.
Oh yeah, Cambridge Analytic.
Yeah, exactly. And segmenting populations for advertising. So in some sense, like these sort of systems, which you might say they're evolution of the systems, cybernetic reasonings and thinkings, are really impacting us, and we're going to need to start to wrestle with how they might, what we can learn, how we can apply. So I'm interested in your thoughts on this. Sorry.
Well, these things are, of course, getting around, and I mean, clearly they're already hitting against social norms and problems, and soon I think the threshold, and we may have already crossed it, is when they develop behaviors that were not intended, that they were not built for, and it's most likely the case that they will, in the sense that these are not programmed, these are basically neural nets that are trained to do something, and when they're trained to do something, they may learn to do something else. Right. That's the coincident problem is a big one. So the other problem is the ethical problem, because a lot of these are being trained to spy on people, grade people on this, on that, identify people, and clearly they will probably do it better than humans, and humans have rates of failure that we know we can't change that well. So these are very dangerous things. I think if I can say anything positive is the right now most of this technology is directed to solving actually capitalist problems. Really, I mean, so why do we need cars that drive themselves, right? They will probably cars that drive themselves will not, most likely, they already kill people, and they will kill more people, and then that industry will be tied against lawsuits and all kinds of responsibilities and serious problems. But that's not the one that urges me. The question is, we have actually much tougher problems that these things could be solving,
Mhm,
right?
mhm, mhm, mhm.
We have a planetary problem,
Mhm.
whether we want to see it or not. So that's what, I think the bright side of this is, why don't we work hard on making those applications, the ones that we need to know. We need to know how we have to change the way we live so that we can live, that we can survive. That's what I'm going to say. It's okay? Or
Yeah. Can we have another 5 minutes after this, or we're really... Yeah. Yeah, all right. So.
Okay, so although I'm not, I don't think I'm extremely qualified to reflect upon these problems, but what I wanted to share is that my way of engaging with the topic was through the works of a, I think she's Belgian lawyer called Antoinette Rouvroy, and her idea has been about the epistemics that are created through algorithms, and she calls this algorithmic governmentality. And what she fears is that what the idea behind algorithms would be that we have real access, unbiased access. We can feed the algorithms raw data. We don't have to do any selection before. That's how the idea is presented to us. And so the risk would be actually that we are losing the boundary in the mark. We don't find anything to rub on, to engage with the algorithm. It just confronts us with the reality, and this is a very different mode of thinking than to draw a distinction and separate two sides. I think that's what I feel. Yeah.
It was sort of a litany of worries, and there's so many points to pick up on in what you said. I'd like to pick out one of these cases that people regularly worry about, because it's discussed in the wrong way, and that's the self-driving cars. Because self-driving cars require an environment suited for self-driving cars. When you say they kill people, that's only because we haven't got the people out of the environment yet. We speak of the self-driving cars if it was a self-contained system, and we omit the fact that it demands the engineering of an environment catering for self-driving cars. And that, you know, I mean, with Go, we have a computational domain, it's representational, it's algorithmic. You know, make Go, make it StarCraft, there will be solutions. That's clear. We know from Spencer Brown, we know that. There's laws of form. But with the self-driving cars, we have to remember that we can't discuss the systems as if they existed in isolation from the domain in which they operate. And when the self-driving cars, the engineering of the environment is often forgotten. We can make the cars as clever as we want, but we have to make the corresponding environment, and that's where the real problem is.
But there will be the self-driving cars down there, right? They're not going to build an environment for them.
But the environment will have to change. The environment will have to change. The markings will become more rigid.
We have to get off the road.
Will become more legal, and we will become constrained by the environment of self-driving cars. If we can try and also just keep it, I'm interested in the relationship with this and cybernetics, or the relationship with this, with the ethics that was started in this anyway.
Because my feeling is that this, so I think in conversation with a few of you mentioned this before, which is, I think we now are living in this cyber age. You know, it's a misapplied and often applied term, but we now have this technology for, you know, monitoring and feedback, but it represents very much a first order cybernetic view of the observed system that we're trying to control. And all of the advances that came in second order cybernetics have not been incorporated into this thinking at all. And so actually, and I don't know what to do, because the thing is out of the box now. So what can be done in terms of bringing the thinking round, so that you have to conceive of all of the relationships involved when you introduce a technology. At the moment, we just throw technology into the world, and there's all this collateral damage from it. And I'm beginning to get very suspicious. You know, you can start to get very suspicious of technology, because the way we develop it, you know, does not encompass the world and all the ramifications that we introduce into it. And sometimes we'd be probably better off not doing it. But this is not the way that we think, is it? Yeah. Progress is synonymous with introduction and technology. And I think the state that we're in now is the consequence of that. I don't know if I said anything there.
Yes.
I actually had a suggestion of, and I might have had a conversation with some of you about this. Just thinking about Donna Haraway and like the Cyborg Manifesto is so relevant. At least like reading it at the moment post Laws of Form and just the way she uses boundaries and thinking about hybridization of how like our relationship with technology and somehow thinking about the second order cybernetics coming into the picture and also talking a little bit about the history of cybernetics and like and I don't know if anyone has any anything to say about Haraway. I know she's still alive and some of us were like, oh, maybe we should invite her to our gathering in 2 years from now. I don't know if she would be interested, but
Thank you. You just mentioned the history of cybernetics. Most of us know it came out of the war. Another great step forward for mankind, generated by slaughter. That wasn't what I wanted to say. I was thinking about what you said about releasing technology into the world, and I had this flash of Facebook. It's a device for selling stuff.
Absolutely.
It's a bunch of advertising. And it's presented us with this wonderful means of spying on our families. We can find out we could until the young left it, found out what they were up to, we could find out what our families were doing, we could lie to them. I think it's wonderful. I know Facebook's kind of been massively, appallingly bad. But it's still wonderful. We can talk to each other in new ways and find out things that people want. I mean, we were talking about how to implement things. If we ask people, they'll tell us.
I mean, as long as they're not bots.
Well, I just want to mention that sometimes we tend to correlate cybernetics and AI or systems like that, and we forget the other part of cybernetics that's about communication between humans as well.
Control.
And we will go back there in many senses. I think that also the evolution of the human will also relate with other biological or pharmaceutical or drug-related activities that will become a reality very, very soon. So there will be a fusion between the digital or the AI systems and the biological parts. I mean, we will not become cyborgs like the Terminator or Power Rangers or something. There will be an evolution, and it's important to start thinking about technology, because we need to bring technology back. Technology could be is a broader concept. Broader concept, exactly. Language, technology, things like that.
We've got one last.
There's another question, and that is, we tend to discuss the world of the coming of AI as a question of agency. So we had God, and we kind of pushed him out, or we had the gods, and we pushed him out. And now there were only humans left in society, and we kind of became semi-gods, so we acted upon the world, and now there's a competitor. But actually there's quite a lot going on in acro economy and acro sociology about who's really the actor. If you look at the development of certain crops, well, never ever in the world, history of the world has wheat been more spread all over than today. So who is the actor? And will wheat be very happy by the emergence of AI and that it destroys? So wheat and AI or coffee or whatever will be. So who are the actors? Where is the agency? And that is the real question. How many different types of agents do we have? And Laws of Form is able to give us the opportunity to develop the insight of what types of agency are we looking at.
Thank you very much. I think we've run out of time.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Is that a gong?
One more question.
Do we have time? Who's got the question?
Lou's gonna.
I'll say something.
Not really a question so much as a comment. I was at this conference that Internet Archive put on a few weeks ago, and if you're interested in this topic, these guys from the Center for Humane Technology did a really good talk with a lot of similar themes to what these slides showed, and yeah, their conclusion is like the AI has surpassed us and humans are way stuck down here. We need to address human emotions and sort of have like the reflection or re-entering process.
Yeah, I just wanted to say we have to remember that we can ask the question, who's making the distinctions?
Yeah.
It might look like the AI playing the better game of Go is making the distinctions, but all that's happening in the context of its interaction with the human beings who are the ones who hold the distinctions that make the game.
Mm-hmm.
And we still don't know how machines could make distinctions independently of us. And it is our garden of making distinctions or imagining that has to be preserved under these circumstances of interaction with technology.